Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for attending today's MIDRC seminar. We are so glad you're here, and I'm so honored to introduce our speakers. They are Despina Kontos. Dr. Kontos is a computer scientist with expertise in artificial intelligence, machine learning, and big data analytics for multimodality imaging data. She's a MIDRC investigator and professor of radiology and vice chair of artificial intelligence and data science research at Columbia University's Irving Medical Center, as well as director of biomarker imaging at New York Presbyterian Hospital. She is also the founding director of Columbia University's Center for Innovation in Imaging Biomarkers and Integrated Diagnostics, a multidisciplinary center dedicated to developing and integrating quantitative imaging and non-imaging biomarkers for personalized disease prediction, particularly in cancer. Chunrui Zou is also a MIDRC investigator, and he's a research scientist at Columbia University Center for Innovation in Imaging Biomarkers and Integrated Diagnostics. And his primary research focus is on the phenotyping of diseases and the derivation of biomarkers through medical imaging, utilizing machine learning and deep learning techniques. Thank you so much, Dr. Kontos and Dr. Zou, for joining us. And to our audience, I'd just like to note you are welcome to submit your questions in the Q&A box. And then after our speakers are completed, I'll walk us through your questions and have them answer them. Thank you all.
Thank you, Heather, for the introduction. I'm going to share my PowerPoint. Today, I'm going to share our work on the integration of longitudinal multimodal medical data using a deep learning-based framework. But first, the question is why longitudinal multimodal data and what is its significance? So longitudinal multimodal medical data is important because it can capture temporal changes, monitor disease progression, evaluate treatment responses, and test causal hypotheses in physiopathology, and so on. While the importance of multimodal data includes, it can capture diverse aspects of diseases, thus provide more comprehensive understanding of diseases, help generate more accurate diagnosis and uncover patient heterogeneity, and so on. Recently, the amount of longitudinal multimodal data is growing enormously. There are a growing number of studies using either longitudinal data or multimodal data, but relatively less study on, there are less studies on integration of longitudinal multimodal data. In this study, we aim to formulate a framework for integration of longitudinal multimodal medical data, identify and summarize the challenges in the integration and establish models to address them, and finally validate the effectiveness of the model using imaging data derived from COVID-19 patients. Let's start with the concept of longitudinal multimodal data for a single patient. Imagine a scenario where a patient has T visits. At each visit, data from M modalities could be collected. This results in a longitudinal data set spanning T time points and encompassing N modalities. However, it is important to note that the data connection across different modalities is often sparse, with only certain modalities being collected at each visit. For each patient, we can represent the longitudinal multimodal data as an ordered pair consisting of the records and their corresponding time points. This data is indexed by both time and modalities when there is only one visit or one time point for data collection. The data becomes cross-sectional. Similarly, when there is only one modality, the data is of a single modality. In essence, we can view this longitudinal multimodal data as a two-dimensional sequence indexed by both time and modalities. The cross-sectional and single modal data are special cases within this framework. Therefore, depending on the perspective, we can view the longitudinal multimodal data as either a sequence of multimodal records or a sequence of longitudinal records. Because the data is indexed in two dimensions, requiring integration at two levels across time points and across modalities, we have two options for sequential integration. We can first integrate across time points, followed by integration across modalities, or we can reverse this order. First, integrate across modalities. If we consider 1D integration in a sequence manner, or we can first integrate across time points. Followed by the integration across modalities. So for some reason, most of the relevant studies chose to integrate across modality first. Different integration orders will bring different challenges. So another crucial aspect of the framework with longitudinal multimodal data is multitask learning. This approach is beneficial due to the following reasons. Longitudinal multimodal data, with its comprehensive nature and intricate relationship between various disease, diagnosis, and comorbidities, is well suited for multitask learning. The second, a single set of medical data can lead to multiple diagnoses, such as clinical outcomes and disease risks. Third, clinical variables were recognized based on specific tasks. Multiple tasks help learn a general representation for better generalization. Suppose there are L clinical variables or labels for the patients. This adds a multitask learning module to the integration framework. The final framework is as shown in the figure. But in the integration, there are several challenges associated with longitudinal multimodal data. Firstly, longitudinal data is heterogeneous. Longitudinal multimodal nature of the data can drastically increase its dimensionality. Secondly, the time points for collecting each data are usually irregular, or visits are usually irregular for individual patients. The time intervals between different visits are variable. Longitudinal data and cross-sectional data also can coexist in the same data set. Thirdly, data of different modalities is usually sparsely collected. The records at each visit are usually incomplete. So in order to overcome these issues, we have employed the multi-head attention mechanism in the transformer, because the original attention mechanism transforms sequence to sequence. The variant with an outside query can transform a sequence to a vector. Masking mechanism in transformer can mask unwanted input to deal with the incomplete records issue. And the precision embedding can encode time interval information. The outside query can also be task specific to solve multitask learning problems. This is an example of using attention mechanism to integrate longitudinal CT and checks X-rays. And the longitudinal CT and checks X-ray is an example of longitudinal multimodal data. We illustrated its direction to first integrate across time points. First, longitudinal CT is integrated across time points, and longitudinal check X-ray features is also integrated across time points. Then integration across different modalities is performed. The final embeddings is fed into the multitask learning. The model can also integrate more modalities. We collected longitudinal multimodal data from COVID-19 patients in MIDRC from 2 sites to validate the effectiveness of the framework. This data include longitudinal CT and checked X-ray imaging data, the outcomes including mortality, ICU admission, and mechanical ventilation usage. These multiple variables were used as multiple labels needed to be predicted from this image data. In total, there are around 2,200 patients. We truncate the visit numbers to 10 visits for all the patients, since there are not enough patients with more than 10 visits. In dealing with the high dimensionality issue in longitudinal multimodal data, firstly, the CT and checked X-ray images were segmented for long regions. We then extract rhythmic features based on the lattice-based rhythmics method in the long region. 271 rhythmic features were extracted from each CT image, and 261 were extracted from the chest X-ray image. These features were then harmonized and standardized. For training strategy, we first partition the data set into training, validation, and testing data set using a stratified sampling approach with a distribution ratio of 65, 15, and 20 respectively. And then Optuna was utilized for automated model training. A total of 50 independent training iterations were conducted to establish a 95% confidence interval, and the predictive performance of the model was evaluated using AUC scores and weighted AUC scores. The results showed that longitudinal CT and checked X-ray data have very different number of visits for different patients. Generally, more patients with worse outcomes tend to have more visits. Several longitudinal rhythmic features for checked X-ray were demonstrated between patients of different outcomes. In this figure, I showed longitudinal progression of the rhythmic feature maps at 3 visits for different patients of 2 different rhythmic features from checked X-ray image. And in this figure, several rhythmic features for CT between the patients of different outcomes were also shown. So between the consecutive visits, you can see the similarity or the progression of the rhythmic feature maps. So even though the progression patterns among different patients vary and this make the direct comparison between different patients difficult due to variable time intervals. We can still see the rhythmic features show discriminative powers between patients of different outcomes across different visits. And the correlation between corresponding features between CT and chest X-ray at the same visit could reach 0.7 for some features. And this demonstrates that different modalities may provide a complementary and yet unique information about the disease. The final results of the testing AUC scores for different outcomes were reported in the tables. For different integration direction, the overall performance is similar, and all of them have reached values more than 0.8 for 3 outcomes. So, however, if we look into the incremental values brought by additional modalities, the situation is more interesting. For integration across modality first, it seems CT features bring a statistically significant improvement over using single chest X-ray modality. For one outcome, ICU admission, additional CT features also bring statistical significant improvement of the AUC scores. However, for integration across time points first, additional chest X-ray modality brings statistically significant improvement in terms of AUC scores, in addition to a single CT modality. But additional CT modalities brings no significant improvement in addition to single chest X-ray modality. So the model framework, our result shows the model framework effectively tackle various challenges such as feature extraction, inconsistent visit intervals, and incomplete reports. And we have got improvement in prediction performance for both chest X-ray and CT modalities, underscoring the significance of integrating multimodal longitudinal data. And the integration of longitudinal multimodal rhythmic features play a crucial role in predicting lung disease outcomes in COVID-19 patients. And we also found that the performance is influenced by the direction of integration. But there are also several limitations and possible future works to our current study. So our study concentrated on medical imaging data only. So however, to further validate the framework, there's a need for more comprehensive longitudinal multimodal data. And although our research was aimed at predicting COVID-19 outcomes, future endeavors could broaden the application of longitudinal multimodal data to encompass more diseases. And given the ever-growing amount and types of longitudinal multimodal data, the prospect of continuing learning could be an important consideration for future studies. And thanks. And for questions, this is shorter than the expected time.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
So I think we're open for questions now. You're welcome to place your questions in the Q&A and I'll help moderate them. And maybe oh great, we have one coming in. I was going to start with one, but we have one to start with. So Dr. Zou, the participant's asking, how does the there's effectively some missing data in the longitudinal data, or you can think about it that way, right? When there's elements missing. And this person is speaking for extracting radiomic features from missing data. How is this being handled?
Okay, so let me go back to the structure slide. Yeah, so if you look at the third item of the list, so in transformer, there's a masking mechanism. The mask mechanism can mask the unwanted input. In normal methods or in conventional method, when there's a missing data, so the conventional method tends to do imputation. So that what brings artifact. But this masking mechanism just mask the unwanted input. So this input will not play a role in generating the final representation from the whole data. So this way, the missing data problem is naturally processed using the attentional mechanism. So, which means it just put no attention on the missing data. And no attention means it plays no role in the final generation of the representation.
That's really interesting. Did you try out any scenarios where you kind of, took away information that you actually had and studied how this particular masking mechanism kind of was affected or not through that process?
Well, that's a very interesting topic. I haven't done this part, but I think it's worth to try to see how robust this method is. Yeah.
Really interesting. So we have a participant who's asking, how did the positional difference among modalities affect the camera's data integration, particularly the initial studies? So maybe they have in mind for a chest radiograph, if the images were AP versus PA versus lateral. Can you talk about kind of imaging acquisition variations in general? Any impacts you saw to your study?
So actually, in my study, I put different modalities acquired at the same day as they are acquired at the same time. So let me go back to the slide. So in the scenario mentioned in this question, so if you look at the chest X-ray and CT, the CT and chest X-ray might be acquired like on the consecutive visit, one with chest X-ray before CT. So in this case, let me see. In this case, so because we have the index for visit, and this information is known by this attention-based network. So which one is before which one is encoded in this structure? Does that answer your question?
I think too that the question askers speaking, how did they're asking about data integration, particularly the initial studies. And if I may kind of interpret that, I don't know if positional difference, maybe they might mean just kind of actual imaging acquisition positioning itself. Maybe the example of a chest radiograph being AP versus PA and a collection of patients. I wonder if you had any insights into how that affects the data integration.
For that information, I think in my study, I haven't studied that part, but we did find similar issues in our data set because for COVID-19 patients, they tend to initially have chest X-ray scan as an initial scan. So if the doctors observe some abnormal presentations in the scan, they then move to CT scans for more detailed scanning. So this kind of order may be associated with the outcomes. So I think, yeah, this question got a point, but in my study, I haven't really studied what's the difference of like the acquiring orders of different modalities and its effect on the final performance. But it's a good question. Yeah.
Thank you. While we're waiting for other questions to come in, I had another one as well. I was interested in that you said you did data harmonization, including standardization. So I was wondering if you could talk more about the harmonization process that you conducted on your data.
Harmonization. So for harmonization, we here, because our data set are from 2 sites, and in each site, they may have different pixel spacings or different parameters. So let me see. I think we do the harmonization for different sites and different, let me see. I don't quite remember all the variables I do harmonization. No, just a minute. So for protection, if you look, if you see this table, we protect the age and gender because the age and gender are significantly correlated with the COVID-19 patients' outcomes. So for these two, with these 2 variables were protected in our harmonization. For standardization, before we feed our data into the network, we do normalization. We minus the mean and divide it by the standard deviation to do the normalization after the harmonization.
Did you use the combat method for harmonization or some other variation on that?
Oh, yeah. We use nested combat harmonization for the batch variables, including the site and other variables.
Thank you. So we have a participant who's asked what other information is obtained from the electronic health record associated with the different imaging modalities. Maybe this question is asking a little bit about what can be done in the future from the electronic health record data to integrate that.
So in our case, the imaging data, we all the parameters regarding the imaging data like contrast and the pixel spacing, something like that, were all collected. And also the clinical variables like the disease, like the mortality, ICU admission, and mechanical ventilation were also collected. And the other variables like age, gender are also connected. I think in the future we can collect it like in addition to imaging modalities, other modalities including like blood sample variables and the genetic variables and the text diagnosis can all be included in our study.
That's great. So another participant's asking, is the tabular data, which they are describing as the extracted radiomics features, are they put into as an input to the transformer model? This question's getting back to the basics of how does this model work? What's the inputs to your model?
The input include the rhythmic features and the time intervals. So that's all the input features into the model. Before we feed any features into the model, I think one issue is to consider what kind of feature extraction technique you want to use to extract the features from different modalities. In our case, because we only consider imaging data set. So for simplicity, we just use rhythmics for both modalities. But for different modalities like text and other continuous variables, you might be consider other like feature extraction method like binarizations or something like that. So
I have another question too. Speaking of features, I'm wondering if you found any individual features particularly important for either the modality integration that you spoke about versus the longitudinal time-based integration. I wonder if you saw any differences in what was important at the feature level.
well, at a feature level, we haven't studied in details, but so for now, we just care about the whole outcome prediction performance. So if we do feature level wise studies, I believe we can find some differences between different features in terms of longitudinality and multimodality, because in our study, if you look at this figure, you can see for some features, you can see clearly for different patients of different outcomes longitudinally. You can see the red one represented the deceased ones, and the green ones represent the discharged ones. So longitudinal will see a difference across different visits, and different progression patterns might be in this data.
Do you have a hypothesis about any that might be more particularly helpful time-wise versus modality-wise? I wonder if you're kind of building some guesses.
I think in terms of my study, because if you look at the final results, for some merging directions, you will see different results for like a different improvement effect for different modalities. So for some merging directions, the improvement is not so significant. So I think personally, intuitively, I think longitudinality maybe in this case plays a more important role, because, and if you see the correlation coefficient, some values between different modalities can be very high. So, but that's a hypothesis. Is yet to be studied.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Really interesting. Well, let's pause and see if other participants, attendees have questions. We're happy to see those in the Q&A. I have another one I'd like to ask if you don't mind. I found your talk very interesting. I found it so interesting at the very beginning where you mentioned that this type of network approach can maybe handle multiple diagnoses, and so it made me think about syndromes or concurrent diseases that often happen, especially in the lungs. So I'm wondering if you're thinking about any kind of multiple diagnosis questions, tasks that you might be looking into soon, especially based upon what you've seen here.
Oh, I'm very interested in lung disease. I think the key issue in this is kind of research study is that we have to get like data, a big data of different outcomes, symptoms, a lot of variables, which may be correlated with each other, but we don't know. And we want to test it out. So in that scenario, this framework could be interesting. Because multi-task learnings can give you a more generalized representations from this, like most recently, the foundation model is very popular and learns like based on different tasks across a large spectrum of different tasks. So, and get to give you robust representation. So I think the key issue in the future, if we want to do this kind of study, is to get like big enough data set with like various labels in this data set.
I think you're right. The need is multi-disease labeling on the images and large data in the first place. That's good.
Yeah, thank you.
Here's a question. Did you consider the region of interest in the images or the whole image for feature extraction? I remember you spoke about segmentation, so maybe you can elaborate a little bit more about your segmentation method. And then the question also points to, did you consider the whole images as well, maybe even in development of your process?
In our study, we only consider long regions instead of the whole image. So if you look at the figure, for chest X-ray and CT images, we use two different techniques. For chest X-ray, we use a method called XLAR, so which can be accessed in the GitHub. And they have their own trend weights, and this proves to be very effective in segmentation because they were trained on images with a lot of abnormal presentations in the lung. And the second segmentation for the CT images is called lung mask, and which can be also accessed in the GitHub with pre-trained weights. And this technique was also trained based on the lung images with a lot of abnormal presentations. So I choose both of this method because for COVID-19 patients' lung, there are a lot of white abnormal areas. So normal segmentation algorithms will fail to segment the whole lung regions. So that's basically the two method I used to do the segmentation for my case.
Well, that's a really interesting approach. Did you consult with any clinicians on that question of how adequate the segmentations were, maybe on just a few cases to spot check it? Especially since, as you said, the disease lung may be more difficult to segment. So that was interesting.
So in our group, we have radiologists segmenting CT lungs for us, and we in our group we have hundreds or thousands of images segmented by radiologists, and I have do segmentation for the COVID-19 lung. So by direct comparison of the segmentation with the previous segmentations by the radiologist, actually the result is pretty good in my case.
That's really interesting. Let's pause and see if any other questions come in. Great, here's one. Did you observe a change in patient diagnosis while observing different time points for the same patient? Maybe a variation on this is really interesting to think about. Did a patient come out of ICU maybe during their longitudinal image series or something like that?
Oh, okay. So in our data set, we do have some limitations, I think, related to the question. For the outcome mortality. So for this one, we don't have to answer this question because all the CT scans were taken like when the patient was alive. But for ICU and mechanical and ventilation usage, actually for this one, I presume that they were taken before this event because we lack the information for the ICU and mechanical ventilation, the time points. At which time point they get this outcome or they get this event was unknown in this data set. So for this data set, we do some assumption that these outcomes were happened after the series of images were taken. So yeah, that's one limitations of this data set. Yeah.
Interesting. Thank you for the clarification. And I had a question, another one. On your AUC results, I mean, I remember that you had weighted and unweighted. Can you just clarify what the weighting means in that table?
So weighted because if you look at this figure, so the percentage of patients with different number of visits are very different. Like in the data set, the severe patients with like worse outcomes are fewer than discharged patients. So in that case, the data set is highly imbalanced with the number of visits. For example, for like patient with one visit, maybe you will have like 1,000 patients, but for patients with 9 visits, probably you'll get like 100 or 50. In that kind of case, if you congregate all the patients together or pull them together to get an average, you see that is not accurate actually. So in my case, I calculate the effect or just weighted the final AUC with respect to the number of visits. So to give you average AUCs across different number of visits. That's what the weighted means for this situation. Yeah.
Thank you. We have time for about one more question, if anybody from our audience would like to raise one. All right. Well, thank you so much, Chunrui and Despina, for your study that you presented today. It was really nice. Thank you so much. And thank you to all our attendees, our participants, for being here. We were so glad you were able to attend. And we hope that you'll keep looking out for MIDRC seminars. They happen, I think, the third Tuesday of every month. And we look forward to seeing you at a future meeting. Thank you.